I appreciate the lectionary pairing up the book of James and the Gospel of Mark during this season. This is the second time, actually, in a few weeks that we've been able to experience James and Jesus as conversation partners, so to speak. We have on the one hand the deeply practical book of James, laying a moral foundation for our relationships with each other. And on the other, we see Jesus at his most powerful and provocative moments, laying out before the crowds an alternative way of looking at the world. And these two go together like hand and glove. Now, who exactly was the author of James is sometimes disputed by scholars, but I like to imagine it being James, the brother of Jesus, since James and the Gospels go together so well. Sounds like good give and take between brothers who respect each other, who have the same ultimate goals, but each have a unique angle, a unique personality, unique way of putting things. Now, since both James and Jesus focus on how we live in real-world conflict and turmoil, I think we do best reading these texts while also reading our current social climate. So before we jump into their words and their world, let's take a moment to remind us of our own. The social climate today is about as antagonistic and hostile as it ever has been. Opinion polls confirm what we already feel in our gut, that we are a people divided with intense emotions around what divides us. Extreme views are gaining ground. Voices of reason and rationality are fading into silence. And the willingness to listen, to learn, to collaborate, and, or God forbid, compromise, that's a rare animal on verge of becoming extinct. If we hate some point of view or hate some public figure representing that view, then we hate with a passion and a vengeance. And it's not a big leap to start dehumanizing people who don't hate the same people we hate. So our righteous hatred, the causes that get us fired up, those deeply motivating passions, which are good in themselves, can start leading us toward a pretty dark place within us if we're not careful, and might make it harder to think, harder to breathe, harder to open up to our neighbors, harder to be real at family reunions, harder to be a good conversation partner. It's a good thing to be passionate on social and political issues, and to be action-oriented, and to be vocal, and even to fight for what is right. Whether the issue at hand is immigration, race, sexism, inequality, poverty, sex abuse scandals, a broken criminal justice system, climate change, the refugee crisis, and the list goes on about things about which we should be fired up. Be passionate for the right and resist the wrong. Sometimes in this broken world we live in, people need a rude awakening to see how far we have fallen. Sometimes we need a jolt of bold action and pointed words, and that's all right and good. But something else is starting to enter our social psyche, I fear. There's something more than courage and activism and righteous struggle going on here. There's something here that feels like the words of James in chapter 3, verse 15. It's something that, quote, does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. whether on the political right or the political left, the common denominator is greater extremism and ugly partisanship. Once we establish two clear sides in this struggle, the right side and the wrong side, no nuance or complexity allowed, then we're free to condemn wholesale everything the other side says and never question the rationale for the positions our side holds. The whole point is to identify which side of the fence you're on and declare it, not to carefully examine the truth claims that created the fence to begin with. We're expert at creating vicious cartoon characters out of our opponents. We've gotten to where it's more important to oppose and vilify the other side than to consider their essential humanity and dignity. We end up in an accidental conversation with someone flying a banner or sporting a bumper sticker that makes our blood boil, and they turn out to be remarkably polite and considerate, and we're surprised. Why? And would we ever dare to consider that there may be a grain of truth in what they stand for? Now, with that pessimistic picture of our contemporary social context in our minds, one that's steeped in class conflict and political unrest and all kinds of other conflict, let's go to the Bible and listen carefully to the words of James and Jesus. Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. Do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. Wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. That was James 3. Now listen to his big brother in Mark chapter 9. Jesus and his disciples were living in a pressure cooker. Conflict was rising, life was getting more dangerous. Jesus started talking about death. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and after 3 days, after being killed, he will rise again. And that was nonsense to the disciples, so they ignored it and went back to what they were good at, arguing with each other about who was the greatest. Jesus called them on it and said this: whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. And then he pointed out a child and said, here, be like that one. So do you think in our contemporary context that Jesus and James might have something profound to say to us? Or is their kind of wisdom quaint and naive? James calls for our actions to be shaped by gentleness born of wisdom. He says if we are discerning, our attitudes and actions will be pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. In other words, the quintessential American politician. Or not. Oh, but see how easy it was to point fingers at our politicians? Or to scapegoat Wall Street or corporate America? But look in the mirror again. Can't we see our own reflection there? If we can't, we should get a soft cloth and wipe it off. It's getting fogged up with our hot air. Yes, James is speaking to you and to me, us ordinary Christians. And if he were here today living in our social climate where more often than not the end justifies the means, I think he would say it again a little louder this time. Maybe especially to us Christ followers who supposedly have a moral framework that says that our means and methods matter as well as the end goal. Choosing how we go about living our lives and living consistently with our stated values is morally on an equal basis with the end goals that we choose. Increasingly, I think that moral principle is being sidelined. There are those around us who say that as long as our righteous cause is advanced, the moral compromises we make along the way are worth it. And if they don't say it quite that boldly, they often act as if they believe it. If truth has to be sacrificed in order to achieve a victory for our righteous cause, well, then that's part of the price of victory. If we have to stoop to the same evil tactics as our enemy in order to defeat that evil enemy, then so be it. If we have to injure, maim, or kill a few innocent lives along the way in order to secure a win for our good cause, sorry, but that's life in the real hard world. Now, on some level that sounds reasonable. Wouldn't logic tell us that there is a cost for moral victory? That sometimes the greater good outweighs the lesser good? And actually, I can think of certain situations where we might choose a small sacrifice for a great gain. We have heroic stories of people sometimes hiding the truth or even telling an untruth in order to prevent greater evil or violence. Think Underground Railroad. Or think about our early Anabaptist forebears being hunted down by persecutors. Menno Simons even told a few white lies. If I knew I could save a human life in a particular circumstance by choosing to withhold certain information, saying I don't know when I do know, or give misleading information to send someone down the wrong path, yes, I believe I would do that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I mean, when the end justifies the means on a broad social scale, when it defines how we live as a society, when we're willing to pay any cost to win. I'm thinking of many of our Christian brothers and sisters, including white evangelicals in large numbers, who have consciously chosen to turn a blind eye to gross immorality in our political leaders because they believe those leaders might deliver on certain legislation or Supreme Court appointments. Or Christians on the other side of the aisle who've done the same thing to help their side win. Author and Methodist Bishop Will Willimon wrote an article this past week called Court Preachers. He noted clergy throughout history who sidled up to power, from 17th century Bishop Jean-Baptiste Massillon, who preached for King Louis XIV at Versailles, to Hitler's pastor, Ludwig Müller, to pretty much every king and president and prime minister since then. Billy Graham was in the Oval Office with a whole succession of U.S. presidents. His son Franklin is now one of President Trump's most ardent supporters. Franklin Graham and a room full of evangelical leaders were at an elegant White House dinner 4 weeks ago. for the president to thank them for their unwavering support. Will Willimon tells how Graham sidesteps questions about the president's marital infidelity or lying or sexual misconduct, or brushes off some of his more offensive language aimed at immigrants or people of color. And Ed Stetzer, another more critical evangelical pastor, recently wrote that we have gained political advantage with this president, but in the process have lost our morality. And an interviewer asked Franklin Graham what he thought of that statement, and he laughed and dismissed it, saying, "Some people think too much." Will Willimon, in his provocative way, writes, "I suppose we preachers ought to be flattered that even powerful tyrants who never care much for Jesus Christ still require the blessing of willing preachers. And in every age there are willing preachers." Unquote. So if preachers throughout the ages have modeled this expedient way of thinking the end justifies the means, we should not be surprised that it's becoming commonplace thinking even for devout Christians. Well, sorry, church. James and Jesus don't let us off the hook that easy. What part of unspiritual and devilish don't we understand? Truth matters all the time. Human kindness matters all the time. Gentleness matters. Dignity matters all the time. Treating others as you want to be treated in similar circumstances matters all the time. I just think it makes sense for me, as someone who claims to follow Jesus, that I ought to pattern my way of life after Jesus. Jesus ate and drank with sinners and was iron tough on the powerful elite. And yes, Jesus used harsh metaphors against the scribes and Pharisees, his own people, comparing them to blind guides, snakes, dirty cups, and whitewashed tombs. But he did not dismiss or dehumanize them. He still spoke to them eye to eye and face to face. He was willing to eat and drink at their tables too, in their homes also, and engage them as human beings. Now, speaking truth to power cannot always be done in a quiet tone of voice. I get that. But practicing gentleness born of wisdom does imply a deep human dignity at the core. Gentleness born of wisdom refuses to sacrifice our core moral framework. It always assumes that in the other, in the one to whom we speak, is a reflection of the divine. The image of God resides in every human being, no matter how misguided, no matter how entrenched in evil that human being may have become. As followers of Jesus, we dare not dehumanize others to score a political or theological point. We dare not dismiss or debase others to ensure our side wins. We dare not create a false narrative in order to get to a true one. That is the case no matter what our venue. Whether I'm on a march or on social media, whether I'm at a family reunion or a meeting in town hall, whether I'm in the ballot box or in a coffee shop, I can be kind and candid at the same time. I can grant human dignity and oppose evil ideas at the same time. I can be pure and peaceable and passionate at the same time. Whenever there is a good cause and an opportunity to speak or act boldly, I have moral choices to make. As a discerning follower of Jesus, representing Christ in this world, I don't have to link arms with those who use methods that are inconsistent with my values. And I don't need to dehumanize them either. It's okay to stand aside sometimes and use our voice in other ways. The point here, which both James and Jesus seem to be making in their own way, is that we who claim to represent the way of Jesus Christ in this world, we are called to moral consistency. If we are rooted in Christ, we will bear fruit that looks like Christ. Even the outspoken Apostle Paul seems to agree with James. It's no accident that James' description of wisdom from above sounds a lot like the fruit of the Spirit. Here's James's list again. Pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And here's Paul's. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I think that's evidence enough that we should care not just about our destination, but the path that gets us there. Do we want to find God? For over 1,000 years, Christians have been singing the hymn Ubi Caritas, where charity and love prevail. There God is ever found. Let's sing it now. Hymnal Worship Book 305.